Open up the webinar. I'm going to open up the webinar today and want to welcome everyone and welcome you and thank you for attending. We have quite a large registration, so I hope everybody gets on. Today's webinar is time to update your governing documents. I am Peggy West, your organizer from Smart CAMS. And CAMS, I would like you to know this is a 1-hour HR credit or an elective credit for anybody who needs those credits. Let's see, board members, here are some information to note that I got off the website. According to Florida statute, board members must meet the following criteria. First of all, you have to be 18 years or older. You must be a board member of the association that you want to get on the board for. You must pass a background check. You must complete a certification course within 90 days of being elected or appointed. You should have leadership skills. As a board member, you will make key decisions that will affect your community and the planning of the future of the property as well. You should have a business acumen. Some of these duties would include selecting an attorney, an auditor, insurance agents, meeting requirements with the insurance coverage laws. It would require reviewing local laws to make sure the rules and the bylaws abide by them, enforcing your documents and rules and penalties, drawing up a budget, determining assessment rates and collecting them. And the board also establishes fiscal policies and reserve funds for the needs of the community as well. Communication is high on being transparent, and you must be organized. This will highly affect things such as your governing documents. And hopefully Paula will be able to answer some questions today as she goes into her presentation. Okay, we have some housekeeping. We are going to be recording this and putting it on a link, but I want to caution the CAMs that are not on. If this gets passed along, you will not receive a credit if you are not live today. We will send out a sponsor sheet that will have the sponsors' contact info on it, so you don't have to remember everything as they introduce themselves here in a minute. Please allow 10 to 14 days to receive your license credit posted on the DBPR because we have quite a few in attendance today. Please put your questions in the chat box and our moderator will call them out to the attorney today. Let me introduce our sponsors. I want to start with Vinteum Software. We have Yasmin Johannes on today. She is the marketing manager and our webinar IT support for today. Yasmin, tell us about yourself and the company.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Peggy. My name is Yasmin. I'm the marketing manager here at Vinteum. Vinteum software has been in the market for 10 years now. We operate across North America. We have two products, Neigbrs by Vinteum, which is a management and communication platform that provides private portals and also websites for HOAs and condos. And we also have Inspections by Vinteum, which is a tool for home and property inspections focused on new inspectors. And our app works on any device. You can use it from wherever you are. You can use it on and offline. And I'll leave our contact details in the chat box so you can reach out to us if you're interested to learn more. Thank you.
Very good. And thank you so much for everything you do. She's the wind beneath our wings here. I want to have an honorable mention to Layla Scola. She's the head of customer success and marketing at Vinteum, very instrumental in pulling all these details together. And now I want to introduce Rudy Martin. He's the Director of Strategic Business Development for M2E Engineering and today's moderator. Rudy, tell us about yourself and the company.
Mute button would help. So my name is Rudy Martin. I'm the Director of Strategic Business Development at M2E. We are a forensic engineering firm. Anything that has to do with your building from the inception, as far as the turnovers, from the milestones in the concrete restoration. So if you have a building issue, please reach out to me and we'll be able to help you. I'm also moderating this event. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We already have 6 questions. If you have a question, please type it there. The chat box, that's just for comments and not for questions. Everybody's putting their CAM number in. We should have recorded your CAM number when you signed up, so there's no need to put your CAM number in the chat box anymore. If you have something nice to say, that's the place to do that. I'll be politely interrupting Paula with some Q&A when I see fit. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have time to answer as many of your questions as possible. Peggy will send out a list of all of the vendors that are on this call. So if you have any questions, you'll be able to reach out to those vendors specifically. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Peggy, and I look forward to another amazing event.
Thanks, Rudy. I also want to have an honorable mention of a marketing team member up in the Orlando area who helps with all of the webinars from M2E, Autumn O'Brien. So please tell her I said thank you. Next, I'd like to mention we have Hafer and Company, Nicole Johnson. She is a partner and operations manager of CPA service, if anyone is looking for CPA service. Next, I want to introduce Kathy Dorn. She's a vice president of association relations from South State Bank. Kathy, tell us about yourself and the bank.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Peggy. We appreciate this opportunity to be a sponsor today. My name is Kathy Dorn. I'm the vice president and association relationship manager with South State Bank. South State Bank is a premier association bank, and we've been serving condominium associations and homeowners associations for more than 20 years. Our services include emergency lines of credit, term loans, as well as a full suite of banking services for associations. How many of you have found yourself in a position where your reserves may not be quite adequate enough to begin funding some projects that you have planned, or maybe your roofs need to be replaced a little earlier than expected? Your insurance premiums are rising unexpectedly. Well, my role with the bank is to work with board members and property managers, as well as their accounting teams and attorneys, to structure the financing for associations so that they can fund those projects. So again, my name is Kathy Dorn. I'm with South State Bank. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to a great webinar today.
Great, thanks, Kathy. Thanks for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce Munyon Painting. Chris Clark is not on, but he is the marketing manager, and his contact information will be on the sponsor sheet I send out. Next, I want to introduce Dawn Miller. She's the director of business development for the Paving Lady. Dawn, tell us about yourself and the company.
Thank you, Peggy. Again, I'm Dawn Miller with the Paving Company. We are a full service asphalt contractor that's been in business since 1985. We do asphalt maintenance. So if you have potholes or seal coating that needs to be done, we'll be happy to come out and evaluate your property. We also do concrete curbs and sidewalks, striping, ADA upgrades to your common areas and parking lots. So enjoy the class and have a great day. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Dawn. Great company. And thank you for sponsoring.
Thank you.
Next, I want to introduce Suli Encolada. She's the director of business development for DSS Condo, large project management company. Great time to introduce you, Suli. What you got going on?
Thank you, Peggy. So my name is Suli Encolada. I'm the director of business development with DSS Condo. DSS is a complete project management company, like Peggy mentioned. We've been in business since 2014. We work strictly with condo associations as project managers and owner representatives, guiding them through the project from inception to completion. We believe that with the right project management on board, a property manager can help a condominium renovation project run smoothly, coming on time and within budget, and cause a lot less disruption to the residents. So you have any project, we'll be there for you. Thank you, Becky.
Great. They love to hear on time and on budget, right?
That's
okay.
Right.
Next, I want to introduce Ricardo Mercado. He's the chief consultant and principal at RMS BE. Ricardo, tell us about yourself. Don't be shy. And
Thank you, Peggy, and thanks everybody for being here today. My name is Ricardo Moncada, and I'm the owner of RMS Building Envelope Consultants. We are commercial roofing and waterproofing consultants. We do not do any of the labor. We sit on your side of the table to protect you during the process. We do the evaluations, we write the specs, we help you with the bidding process, selecting the contractor, the pre-construction, and then the quality assurance throughout the project to make sure that you receive the most value out of your roofing and waterproofing dollars. If you want your building evaluated at no cost, we'll be more than glad to come out, take a look at it, and see what the conditions are, and we can take it from there.
Awesome. Okay, last but not least, I want to introduce Katie Phillips. Katie, are you on? She's the director
Hi,
of.
I'm actually here. I'm in Paula's square, you know, because I like to
Okay.
change squares every now and then. We're in the same room, so I don't want audio feedback killing all of you, but I am Katie Phillips. I am the education director here at Rosenbaum. And I know I put, which is what probably prompted everybody to put their name and CAM number in the chat. We do have all that from sign in, from your registration. We use a third-party company that does the certificates too, and we export the data. So all I wanted you to do is make sure your name is spelled correctly on Zoom. If it's not, if it's coming up Samsung Galaxy or Tom's iPhone, you need to send me an email and let me know what your name is for the certificate and for your credit. And we will get those certificates out to you by Friday at the latest. I have a lot of annual meetings. I'm an election monitor. Rosenbaum is a full service law firm. We have offices here in West Palm Beach and in Stewart. Paula Mera is going to teach your class today. She's sitting next to me in her Chiefs red because she's super happy that they won the Super Bowl. And I'm the one that's going to be getting your certificates out and the credits to the DVPR. And I promise you I will get them. The DVPR's had a little bit of a delay lately. They're probably like 2 to 3 days now to see the credit when it used to be 24 hours. So if I get them done by Friday, please wait till like next Wednesday till you look and see that they're there, just to make sure that they post. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Peggy, or to Paula if we're ready to get started. Good.
Okay, Paula, take it away. Tell us about yourself. I know you've been an associate attorney for a long time and what you do for communities.
Perfect. Thank you, Peggy. My name is Paula Mera, and I've been an attorney for 21 years, primarily focusing on association, country clubs, so condo association, homeowners association, a lot of co-ops as well throughout Florida. I received my law degree at University of Missouri, Kansas City. So I'm actually licensed in Missouri, Kansas, and then also Florida. And this is where I have been, again, for 21 years. I was at a large law firm in Boca Raton for most of my career and found Rosenbaum in 2018 and decided to join Rosenbaum because it was a deep bench of experience. Myself and my colleague, Steve Brayton, who has over 26 years of experience. We also work with Michael Casanova, who has 11 years of experience. He's also a licensed CPA. And then, of course, Dan Rosenbaum is our managing shareholder, who has over 43 years in association experience and also does a lot of litigation. So we have a strong litigation department here as well, which hopefully for our association clients, we don't see you in that department very often. It's Steve and I's job to most of the time keep you out of that area. So today, we'll get started, and what we're going to discuss is amending your governing documents. It has become more popular, especially after moving out of COVID. The boards are able to meet, plan some projects. So with that, we're going to start sharing the screen, and we'll move through this PowerPoint. And as Rudy mentioned, there will be the Q&A, and he will be able to interrupt me from time to time with some good questions, and no question is a bad question, and we'll try to get to as many as possible as we move through. And it is, again, the class, the course is it time to update your governing documents? It's about an hour course, but we'll move through it, these slides pretty quickly, and again, have the opportunity to answer questions, because sometimes with these types of courses, the best information comes from those questions from you all as community association managers or as board members. There you go. Thank you, Katie. So again, At some point in time, it's going to come to the attention of the board that your documents that you're working with, your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, or your declaration may need some work. You may need to amend from time to time with certain small patch amendments, or ultimately you may decide to do a full amended and restated document, governing document. There's a process to this. You're going to, of course, work with legal counsel to amend your governing documents. If you're a condo, HOA, and co-op. Let me just point out that when you amend your governing documents as a cooperative, it's a very different process because of course you have that long-term lease. So I'll touch upon that from time to time because I'm sure we have at least a few listeners here today that live in a co-op or that work with co-ops. The definition of a condominium, let me just tell you generally what that means. So let's kind of dive into condominiums first and your declaration of condominium, which is very different than your homeowners association declaration. And that is because when you live in a condominium, it is a form of ownership where, of course, you own your unit, and that is the parametrical boundaries of your unit that's described in your declaration. And then with that as well, you own your percentage share in the common elements, your undivided share with all of the other unit owners. That declaration, your original declaration, will provide an exhibit that determines what you own in those shares. More recently, those shares are usually divided by how many units are in the building. But from time to time, we will see shares based upon a percentage basis, especially in the 70s and the early 80s. And also when you talk about high rises, when you have penthouse or different levels of units, you may see shares shared differently in that exhibit. That is, when we're amending the governing documents, important to point out that particular exhibit. The shares cannot be amended. They cannot be changed except if 100% of the owners vote for that change. So that is the exhibit that when your counselor, when your attorney is working with the association to amend your declaration of condominium, one of the things I always recommend is there are exhibits to your declaration of condominium. And while it does increase your recording cost to bring those exhibits forward into your new document, that is something I typically recommend. And that's because we don't want to go back. We're working on now our amended and restated declaration. It's been recorded, but sometimes we'll have to refer back to those original exhibits. So I'll get into more detail about that later. Other things, when we go through a condominium amendment project, we're not going to be changing the unit owner parametrical boundaries in the space. You can, however, change maintenance obligations from declaration to declaration. Co-op apartments, cooperatives are governed by Chapter 719, and you do not have a property ownership in the building. Instead, you have a property, you have an ownership as a shareholder. Recently, 719 was amended to codify what we originally would see in a co-op from a shareholder interest to an actual property interest. So that was codified in 719, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, to clarify that the ownership still does have a property interest associated with it. So the co-op is owned by the building, by the corporation, and then all of the leaseholders own stock in that corporation. When we amend for co-ops, again, it's a very different process because you have the leasehold, which goes from the original owner to every successive owner. And then you have your bylaws, which operate a little bit more like a declaration would operate and consistent with the bylaws as well. So a co-op is very different than a condo with respect to looking at those documents, how do you update them, and how you address different building maintenance obligations that have changed over time. As you guys both, most of you all know, co-ops were the 50s and 60s. In the 70s, it really kind of moved into condos, but we still have a lot of co-ops around. And when they do amend their governing documents, again, you will use an attorney so that they can guide you through that process. Homeowners associations, again, a very different animal with respect to you own your lot, maybe a 0 lot line if you're a townhome or even a home. And your parcel ownership is going to be driven and dictated by your declaration of covenants and restrictions. And those particular common areas will also then be governed by your declaration. and your plat. So don't forget your plat for your homeowners association. There's a lot of information that originates out of your plat. And when you amend your declaration, you need to make sure that there's an understanding that everything springs out of your plat. So you cannot offend whatever provisions are in your plat with respect to any amendments in your declaration. The plat comes first, the declaration comes second. Let's just kind of dive into governing documents. What do they include? I really think this is an important component of, as a board member, your education, because there is a lot of confusion, which is okay. You're not supposed to, as a volunteer, come out of the banking industry or whatever career you may have had and understand what the governing documents are for your condo, HOA, or your co-op, and what do each of those governing documents operate? What is the authority? Why do we use that particular article of incorporation? What is the purpose behind those compared to the purpose behind the bylaws? So let's kind of talk about that, because again, in my experience, when I'm working with my clients, I do find that if I give them at least the basis threshold of the clear understanding, then we can move forward when we are operating or administrating the association. And especially when we work with amendments, going into the amendment process with your attorney and understanding what restrictions belong in the declaration, what provisions belong in the bylaws, and what provisions belong in the articles of incorporation will give you, as a board member or even association manager, a better understanding of coming out of the amendment process with a clear and consolidated operable governing documents. The declaration, as I mentioned, for a condominium, that declaration will have the parametrical boundaries, which are super important, the percentage shares, and all of the maintenance obligations of your particular building or buildings. So as you all know, the condominium can be a high rise of 19 stories or higher down in Miami, right? Or in West Palm, we have the high rises shooting up everywhere. We have the mid rises over in South Palm Beach and Palm Beach. We have out west some of our communities that are multi-condominiums with many buildings. We also have condominiums in some areas that are actually single-family homes. So just because it's a condominium, that doesn't mean that you're going to have that building fit into one cookie cutter shape or size. And again, you can even have single-family homes that are condominiums. The declaration of condominium, again, is going to, most importantly, the parametrical boundaries of the units. That does not change when you amend, if you're doing a full amendment. It's also going to provide for maintenance obligation. You'll find that if you're a recent turnover or from the developer, or you're a community that has existed since the late 70s, then you will have maintenance obligations in your original declaration that perhaps haven't been contemplated to change over time. Let's talk about dryer vents from time to time. That seems like a silly thing to talk about, but it comes up often. Who is responsible to maintain and clean the dryer vents? Well, of course, that's going to depend on the building type, but that's one of the amendments that we find ourselves implementing into the amended and restated, or just a patch amendment, so that everyone understands, because that is a very important function, knowing the maintenance of doing that. Also, different things like the drain lines, things like that. When we are talking about amending our governing documents, one of the most important things that come up with the condominium are the maintenance obligations. The maintenance obligations in your original declaration may provide for the association to do certain functions, but over time, as a matter of practice, owners have picked up that obligation. So you'll speak to your attorney to make sure and make a list of the day-to-day operation with respect to maintenance, making sure that your new declaration or a spot amendment is going to address those different changes if necessary. The articles of incorporation, this is going to apply for HOAs and co-ops as well. The articles of incorporation is your foundation document for the Secretary of State, and it designates your association as a Chapter 617 not-for-profit. That's the update that you do every year at the Secretary of State. Your articles of incorporation is a pretty basic document. And frankly, I like to keep it basic, because if you keep putting different terms and provisions in each of the articles or the bylaws, there's an opportunity or a chance for those to be in conflict or be ambiguous between the two. So what belongs in your articles of incorporation from the original articles of incorporation where the developer would have provided the term of the directors, how many directors serve on the board at any one point in time, the purpose of the corporation, not-for-profit corporation. Very important to have a very broad purpose, because although 617 provides for the purpose of your declaration of condominium, your homeowner association, or your co-op, you want to have a broad purpose in your articles of incorporation to include things like whether or not you can take title to units, to include the ability to get loans for maintenance, etc. Those types of things, they're in your articles of incorporation. The bylaws, a very important document, and it's a very, in my opinion, pretty easy document to update and amend. And that's because typically for your condominiums, your homeowners, your co-ops, your bylaws are going to be the governance of your association board and members. So your board meetings, the term of the boards, whether you have staggered terms, which is something we always recommend, and your membership meetings, how they're called, the amount of time that needs to be noticed for certain types of decisions or acts. The bylaws from association to association typically can maintain some regularity with respect to the provisions in those bylaws. And that's why I say generally overall, it's an easy document to update, because your attorney typically can tell the association board, this is the new and improved bylaw provision for this or that. And that's what we have. And of course, attorneys, it's no secret, we typically work with boilerplate language a lot of the times. You'll see this in the bylaws. However, what I do have, many associations want to include additional provisions in their bylaws that will mirror what 718, 720, or 719 actually provide statutorily. I'll tell you, it's not my favorite way to amend bylaws, but I do have, again, many clients that want to incorporate statutory language into the bylaws, because everybody knows that their owners are not going to go and review the statute. For example, with respect to official records inspections requests and how many days the statutes provide for that person to be entitled to inspect. Again, I like to keep the governing documents consolidated with respect to the provisions, but I do understand from my client's point of view why they would want to incorporate some of those statutory owner rights into their bylaws, so we don't have to go searching through the statutes. When we discuss rules and regulations, it's very important to understand this distinction. Your declaration of condominium or your declaration of covenants with respect to HOAs or condos, respectively, that is the governing document that the courts understand can be amended from time to time. And through that amendment process, provisions that are in the declarations have more weight. They carry more strength with respect to enforcement. Whereas, again, very good takeaway point today, the rules and regulations cannot be arbitrary or capricious, but the courts will not look at the rules and regulations that are promulgated when we seek to enforce those with the same designation of weight as you would if it's a provision in your declaration. So keep that in mind. Rules and regulations should be flexible. You do not have to record your rules and regulations in the official records of the county. So you'll want your rules and regulations to be flexible. Again, they cannot be arbitrary and capricious. They need to be stated clearly. This also with your rules and regulations, although it's a flexible document adopted usually 98, 95% of the time by the board of directors, but keep in mind, I've seen declarations that provide that the rules and regulations have to be approved by membership. I don't see it often. And when we do see it, Steve and I usually put $1 in the curse word jar, because really the rules and regulations, the intention behind that was for board of directors to have discretion from time to time with those more minimal types of invasive rules, as opposed to putting those in the declaration. So just keep that in mind. Rules and regulations adopted by the board of directors. Also keep in mind, you cannot make a rule and regulation to govern an activity for which you don't have that authority stemming from your declaration. So again, when you adopt new rules and regulations, I always encourage my clients to work with your attorney to make sure it's consistent with the authority provided in your declaration, and that your rule and regulation is not in conflict with your declaration, So when you go down the road to try to enforce it, you're actually enforcing a rule that's not enforceable. And they are written clearly so that we don't have to spend time on attorneys to try to enforce a rule that is otherwise not enforceable.
Paula,
So-
I got some questions about bylaws and
Perfect.
declarations right here. If you're making updates to bylaws, declarations, rules, do those have to be two separate ballots that are needed for voting?
So kind of getting into the framework of the process of amending, that depends. You can do it piece by piece. You can prepare the limited proxy to have separate questions. That way, if one fails, then and the other doesn't fail, then you've passed at least one of those. Generally, what we recommend for updating is understanding the process overall. So I'll just kind of jump right into that, because this little particular slide is, first of all, do you need to update your governing documents? And that's going to be, I think, a question that is a work product of the board of directors or perhaps a committee. And working with your association attorney, there are many times where Katie and I are first introduced to a client, and the premise of our representation is based upon, we want to update our governing documents. And there's plenty of times that I've looked at the bylaws and the articles and said, okay, these are fairly, they're older and I don't like the provisions here or there, but you do have a 2007 declaration that was updated, amended, and restated by a really good attorney. And he is no longer, he put all of the different provisions in that particular declaration that I would have put in today. So we've had that a few times in the last couple of years, one particular area that this particular attorney had done. And I said, I wouldn't update your declaration. I would maybe do a spot amendment here or there, but I wouldn't update, I wouldn't spend the money to do it. So those are kind of the questions that you're checking the boxes. Is it time to update? What are we really looking for? And do we need a full update, or can we do spot amendments to address whatever issues are taking place now that need to be addressed? So again, you're going to look at the question that was asked was, can we update this through a limited proxy with just one vote? That's really at the tail end of this process. So the process really for my clients, I'm going to use an example. I had a client that didn't reach out first to me. And we've represented this client for a long time, and went through the committee process first for their governing documents. And the committee made comments on their original deck. But what that did when it hit my desk is I just kind of went through it and said, no, 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 this is here for a reason. And that's why your attorney, with respect to your declaration, whether it's an HOA or a condo, there are provisions in your declaration that are so mechanical to the functioning of your association. I wouldn't expect someone who, even if you're an attorney, if you're not practicing in this area, to understand that framework of your governing documents. So you're going to start with the framework of your governing documents. The first thing that we recommend is we work with our clients to set up a flat rate to amend. A flat rate being, I'm not going to bill you hourly. I'm going to say I'm going to charge you X amount of dollars for all 3 documents. This is after I look at your documents to say how many hours I think it's going to take. That flat rate also includes some very key components for a successful update. And those are this. You will have the attorney review the governing documents first. First, we have a meeting after the flat rate's accepted. We have that meeting to say, what are the real problems out there? Where are your governing documents not working for you? So we can spot those particular issues. And then we also, as a component of that, we as attorneys know where we're going to change things because this is a problem, this is a problem. There's an example that we just talked about last week, Steve and I, with respect to the cable and internet statute refers back to cable services through a separate statute section, which, for example, only provides for cable and actually accepts out internet. So we have a lot of clients that are going, they're not doing cable in their renewal, they're just doing the internet streaming. So that's one of the governing documents provisions that's now just catching up, which is problematic. So as an attorney, we're going to look for those types of things, which as your committee or your board wouldn't see that. And then the next thing is to put together a first draft and then meet with the board or the committee and review that first draft piece by piece and say, does this work? Does this not work? The next step after we've got that draft and we have the second and we have the proposed draft to go to the membership, our recommendation is to have a town hall style meeting where hopefully to save cost, the association has the consent to send notices electronically. So you can send those drafts, electronically, or you treat it as a town hall meeting so that you can send those electronically. The owners then have an opportunity to address the changes in the governing documents. Why is this so important? It's very important because you want your governing document project to pass. And if you have a controversial provision, rentals comes to mind, right? Or the definition of guest, or how long can your guest stay? Can your guest stay in your unit without you? Those types of things that affect people's day-to-day living can become controversial. So you want the opportunity to hear that feedback, make changes as necessary, or back to that question that was just asked, potentially carve out that controversial amendment from the entirety and have it a separate vote. So there's different mechanisms we can use to do that. So overall, you guys can tell from just my description that the amendment process is a very collaborative process. And hopefully, again, the framework and the roadmap for where you go is laid out from your attorney. I think in a way that I've just laid that out. You understand there's a flat rate, what it includes. It does include the town hall meeting. It includes the meetings with the boards. And then it may or may not include that final piece of it when we have our final draft that we're going to put to a vote of the owners. And that would be the question. So yes, you can specify out and you can carve out within each document if you think you have a controversial provision that may or may not pass.
Can you explain why people use limited proxy forms to vote on amendments?
Yes. So that's a really good question. And it's kind of one of my favorite topics because it's sometimes overlooked. And that is when we put a question to the vote of the membership, whether it's amending the governing documents or some other type of membership vote that we need, a limited proxy is a piece of paper, right? It has statutorily required information. The proxy holder holds the proxy. Who is the proxy holder? Each owner, each member of an association has the ability to designate a proxy holder to attend a meeting on their behalf and to vote on an issue on their behalf. A limited proxy is a proxy that designates within the proxy form the question and then the vote. So as a proxy giver, you are going to say, Paula Mera at such and such address gives her proxy to, and typically what you see in the limited proxy forms is two choices. A board member of the association, typically the secretary, check here. Or if you want to designate Katie Phillips as your neighbor to bring your proxy to the meeting, then you check that box and you put in Katie Phillips. And Katie Phillips is now your proxy holder. You date and sign that proxy. If Katie Phillips is my proxy holder, one of the things that people don't understand, a lot of people, Katie Phillips must attend that meeting. So on that proxy, we're going to have a meeting date of March 4th, which is my birthday. So we're going to have a limited proxy on Paula's birthday, and we're going to have Katie carry my proxy to the meeting because I'm going to dinner. And that proxy, however, because it's limited, will have my specific vote within it. I approve the governing document amendments. You'll want to make sure that your limited proxy is very clear in the question that you're asking that person to vote for. Limited proxies, this is the magic behind a limited proxy. If the vote is, and the meeting is for March 4th, and Katie carries my limited proxy to the meeting, and the association does not have enough votes to pass that provision for the amendment, then the membership, because this will be done at a membership meeting, has the ability to motion to adjourn and recall the meeting date to a later date. That proxy, that limited proxy, is good for 90 days. So for example, we have a community, we did an amendment for spot amendments for, which were very difficult to pass. I think they'd failed on 2 different occasions, if I recall. So we did this particular process to get our documents passed. They had almost 1,600, 1,650 members. I think their threshold was 75%. So again, kind of like throwing this in here, one other takeaway point. I already gave you one, I'll give you a second one. One of the things for an amendment that you'll want to look at is your amendatory threshold. They had a 75% threshold for the amendments. So they were not able to get anything passed. It was a huge project. But we did use the limited proxy. We had the meeting date of March 4th, let's say. We did not obtain enough votes. So what we did is we adjourned the meeting, announced at that meeting that we would have the next meeting on April 15th. And then we put the tennis club and the pickleball club out to work, and they went and obtained more proxies voting in favor of our amendments. We reconvened the meeting on April 15th, and we were just short. So again, we did the same process. We adjourned the meeting, called it for the second date. Let's say we're going to do May 30th. That's within 90 days of March 4th. So then on May 30th, we obtained the requisite votes to amend our governing documents. So that limited proxy is a very good tool to use with respect to amending, being able to tally the votes, understanding where your votes are, and then going out and canvassing your condo or your HOA to get the necessary votes. So the limited proxy form is great.
So let me ask you this. So somebody put a question in chat. Please, I'm going to read it, but try to please put these in the Q&A. And it's an interesting question. There's currently a division amongst owners about one of the bylaws. I'd like the owners to have time to review the documents before the board puts them up for voting. How would they do this? So how would they kind of, spread their gospel, for lack of a better term, and making sure that they are educated and, can they print material? Can they hand it out? Like, what is allowed and what isn't allowed?
So I think the best approach is to have the town hall meeting with your attorney present. I'm not a big proponent of cover letters that try to explain the amendment unless it's complicated, but you definitely want your attorney involved, because I don't want to see any information where it was misleading and the voters relied upon that. I think the best opportunity is to have a town hall meeting. That is not the meeting at which the owners vote. The town hall meeting is the opportunity for owners to, and Zoom is beautiful, right? To attend via Zoom. I did one just the other day. They attended via Zoom. I shared my screen. Owners were able to ask freely through the Zoom questions, just as if we were in the same room. And we went through the provisions, and I made notes about what the owners' thoughts were, then went back to the board, changed those. So really what you're able to say and not say, you do want to be cautious of what you put in writing, because you want to make sure it's consistent and accurate with respect to what that vote, what that change is. And then ultimately you do, I think, in my opinion, want to have the owners have that opportunity. If you have the opportunity, and sometimes we do, depending on the size of your community, for the community I was just referencing, we did 4 town hall meetings throughout time. So kind of, again, that's kind of a highlight to what time frame could we even expect our governing documents to be amended. Again, it really depends on the size of your community, the nature of the amendments, but give yourself the opportunity, give the association the opportunity to have the town hall meetings. And the underlying key factor there as well is you're allowing owners to participate. Certain owners, especially if they're against it, if they don't have the opportunity to participate, there's a lot of information that can be disseminated from the ownership group that doesn't like the amendment process or what you're amending, which they can they can be very active in trying to thwart the amendment process as well. So it's an interesting question because there's a lot of different layers to that. But ultimately, the takeaway is definitely town hall meetings for the opportunity for owners to ask questions and get their answers. Have your attorney present at those, of course. And then also, if there is information that's being disseminated, have your attorney perhaps put out a cover letter with the draft or dispelling what that amendment means. This happens frequently with rental restrictions because both 720 and 718 provide that for rental restrictions. Only the individual owners who vote in favor of it will be subject to certain rental restrictions like the length of term change, waiting list, whether you can have a hold list, a moratorium based upon the time you buy, things like that. But keep in mind, rental restrictions with respect to approval, background checks, fees related to those, et cetera, apply to everybody, whether you vote or not. So that's a complicated whole other course for that. But if you want to have a successful amendment process, you are going to have the opportunity, hopefully, to have your membership involved before you go to a vote.
There's a consolidation question, and I don't know if it's the same. Amend versus consolidate. Is it possible to consolidate 400 pages of governing documents down to 125 pages without having amended? Well, if they're changing it, they're amending it. So is there such classification as consolidate and not amend?
So that's so the reference to a consolidation, it's a good example I can bring up, because typically what we find is we have older governing documents. And when you become a client at most firms, especially ours, we have a governing document folder, and it's labeled with every successive amendment that has been recorded against your original, right? So you have your articles, your bylaws, your deck, and then every amendment that has taken place that was not in and wasn't a full amended and restated document. So it can become quite burdensome to say, okay, I've got 15 amendments here with 4 or 5 amendments in each. So when you go to look at your original declaration, now you have to flip back towards pages. Did this get amended? Did this get amended? And even for the attorneys, it's funny because you may miss something, go, oh, wait, this was amended, right? So I think that's what the person's asking is, how do you take all of those and consolidate them into a formal document? I would call that a restatement, because what you're doing is you're basically restating what's existing and you're not changing anything. You're just taking your 50 amendments since the original bylaws or articles or deck, and you're restating them into one consolidated document. So you don't have to constantly flip back and forth, but you're not amending or changing any of those terms, which have already been part of an effective amendment.
So this is basically like cleaning up the file.
That's a good way to put it. And with that, I'm going to tell you, don't do your own cleaning, please. Yeah. Because what you want to do is, again, go to your attorney and have the attorney restate that, clean it up. We typically will send the entirety out to a typist, in a sense, because that's the only way you can typically get those documents to be consolidated, is to retype them. But your attorney needs to go back through and make sure that the consistency with those amended provisions is accurate. I have seen clients who work with documents that they tried to retype themselves, and it's never turned out good. And one of the things, I'm just going to throw this out there, one of the things we offer our clients as well is my assistant will put together, I call them like the Bible, right? They'll put together these amazing document folders with the tabs, which is helpful. And I always offer that to our new clients as well. We charge the copy cost for that, to do that, because we have to pull your documents anyway. So that's always helped our association managers when I've went to meet them and everything is just all over the place. You certainly have a frustrating time, but it is recommended as well. If you want to restate all of those, then that's something that you can do. And then you can re-record that restatement in the official records, and that can be the consolidated, restated declaration or articles or bylaws moving forward. So you're not flipping back and forth.
Some people made some comments that there's been so many, recopies and recopies and recopies that they're not legible. How do they obtain a clean copy? Do they have to go to the original lawyer that wrote it? Is there something in the courts where they can go, or is whatever they have on file at that building the last standing testament?
So the declaration, articles, and bylaws will be what is recorded in the official records. To the question of when something's illegible, that does happen sometimes. And the clerk's office will stamp that as illegible. You see it from time to time. I really don't see it that often. What any association, in my opinion, should do if you're in that situation is seek legal counsel and have that attorney. When we do our governing documents with respect to a new client, we pull what's called an ATID search. That is a title search. And that title search pulls all of your governing documents, every amendment to that governing document. In addition, we have governing documents where we know through either representation that there may have been an arbitration decision that changed something that was never recorded. There's those things too that can pop up. So You may also have different orders or orders from a municipality that will affect the governance of your association. Those things will pull up in an ATID search. So that is my recommendation. If something's still illegible, which happens from time to time, then we do our best to obtain a copy. Sometimes you even go back to the microfiche at the clerk's office, which it's usually not as legible as what we would like it to be, but that doesn't happen as often as you would think. So I'm probably guessing that whoever is asking the question might just have copies after copies after copies. So I would probably just ask your attorney, if you have one, can I have a book copy of the documents that you're using? Because every attorney does the same thing. We pull everything from ATID so that we make sure we have everything. If it's still illegible, I have an example that's in my head. We retyped to the best that we could that particular original declaration.
Okay, great answer. So I got a couple of questions about rules and how they're enforced. If an association passes an addendum restricting the size of pets, dogs, are all owners subject to that change, or only the owners who voted for the same?
So with respect to a declaration or a weight restriction, again, we want to see that in the declaration and not necessarily the rules and regulations. But if I have a 40-pound dog today and you pass that restriction, I would be grandfathered with respect to my existing dog. But when Fido passes, then I can't go and replace Fido with a 40-pound dog if that amendment has been passed and duly recorded. Those types of rules and restrictions, because everyone knows, if it's a dog or a pickup truck, those types of things, I recommend amending your declaration. Again, they're more enforceable, they come with more weight, and those types of rules and regulations, kind of the examples I just gave you, are people are pretty passionate about those things. So you definitely don't want to just put them in your rules. But if you do put them in your rules, and it's going to be an effective date forward for things that individuals would have a vested right to keep if they have those items, the dog or the pickup truck, at the time of the amendment.
So after the ink dries on the amendment, who enforces it? Who enforces what, when, and how? Because it looks like some new rules are being put in place or new amendments, but they're not being enforced. So after there's an amendment and there's a change, who's responsible for enforcing that?
Once there's amendment, I mean, if it's been properly amended, then the board of directors is responsible to enforce not only the amendment, but any governing document provision. So if that's not being done, then that needs to be addressed and looked at. If you're relating this question perhaps to pets, we could be talking about emotional support animals being an exception to any rule or regulation with respect to an animal, dog. I also want to point out, I get this question about this a lot. We do not, in my opinion, put emotional support animal rules in your governing documents. ESAs are governed by federal law and Florida law. So your rule is your rule. Your rule is you cannot have a dog greater than 40 pounds. That doesn't mean, however, if you have an ESA, blah, 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 that doesn't go in your declaration. It doesn't go in your rules. You have the rule. And then if someone needs an ESA, then it's an accommodation request. And that falls outside of what should be in your governing documents.
We're getting a lot of questions asking about windows, and I know you're not going to have the answer to these questions, and I'm guessing, and shame on me, I'll let you answer the question, but you don't really know the answer to these questions until you see the documents and how they're written. So in a case of, can you force a unit owner to install shutters or impact doors? People are installing windows and doors. Should the association, update their notes? And there was one other one on windows. I can't find it, but anything that relates to kind of windows.
Yeah.
Can you answer those questions?
Well, I can answer generally because it's an interesting topic, especially of course for our condominiums, right? That's kind of where it's driven, or even our co-ops, but the co-ops, no, I take that back. It's the co-op buildings building. So for our condominiums, it's a hot button issue. But there's a couple different avenues that we can travel down for results. And that is the amendment process. If you have a condo and it is an owner obligation to maintain, replace, or repair those windows, that can be modified through an amendment. The problem becomes half of your condo's already done it and the other half hasn't, right? So now how do you create that as a common expense? There's ways around addressing that particular question. One of the things I do typically recommend is if you have unit owner obligation for maintenance of windows, it's wise to change that to an association obligation. Again, depending on your certain circumstances. As far as the hurricane impact goes, that is a 718 requirement that you can require through, again, the amendments, the hurricane impact requirement to replace those with hurricane impact windows. So that's the statutory obligation that can be imposed upon an owner if they're refusing to do that. It's something, again, for condos, we highly recommend moving towards. Not that it's going to drive down your insurance rates considerably, but you become you become more marketable in the market when you do have all of your windows replaced with impact windows on your condo building. So you'd either look at 718 to require that, or you would look to amend your governing documents. And ultimately, again, when you're amending your governing documents, that's one of the questions I always ask my condo clients is, you know, what's happening here with your condo? I could have a condo that has 12 units and everything's under control, or I can have one that has 80. And we want to look at the amendment with respect to whose obligation is it. Today, with respect to the windows, you would be quite surprised. I have mid-rises that have 20 stories, and the owners are responsible for the maintenance of the windows. Which, you know, when you're staging your concrete restoration work, now you're having to work with your owners individually for the replacement of their windows, or for, you know, removing the windows and putting them back in. So that's one of the big hot button issues that definitely through the amendment process, you can look at the existing problems for your condo today and address those through that process. And I will say that if it's an owner obligation and you have an engineer that has said to the association, these windows are so old, or the tracks are so old and they can't be replaced because you can't find the same tracks for your 1978 doors, then you can move through a legal process to require that owner to replace those windows and doors without an amendment process. If that's the condition of the doors, that's a unit owner maintenance issue.
I'll let you get back to your flow of the presentation. We do have some other good questions, but I'll hold them. And
yeah,
thank you for answering those.
Yeah, those were all great questions. So this is a good slide kind of to stop on, because I was referencing, which again would kind of be my third takeaway point, and that is when you have a super high threshold to amend your governing documents, one of my recommendations, especially if you have a larger membership association, is to reduce that membership requirement. So I see a lot of 2/3 or 75% of the entire membership. What do we find happens here? What we find is apathy. So you have the owners who are participating in the amendment process. They want the amendments to pass. Again, let's say you have 1,500 homeowners. The other half that don't show up, it's not because they don't like the amendments. It's because they're not even paying attention. And unfortunately, that apathy and lack of participation counts as a no vote. So what I always recommend doing is tying your amendment process, especially for our larger communities, to your quorum thresholds. So you can tie if you have a quorum, it's going to be 75% of the voting membership after your quorum is attained. So if you had a quorum of, let's say, the 30%, which it can be no higher for HOAs than 30%, you want to make sure that you tie the voting membership who participates to vote in favor or potentially to vote against to your quorum. And the way that operates, it slides. The more people that show up, obviously, because they hate the amendment, the more votes you'll have against it. Versus the more people, if they do like it, will show up. Most people don't show up, and then you get it passed because those people were voting for it. That's not a very good explanation. It's kind of hard to explain, but the premise, the takeaway point is you tie your amendatory threshold into your quorum. And the way that you express this to owners is if it's a controversial amendment that people do not like, guess what? They're going to show up because they understand that if they don't, it could pass. We sometimes make the joke, and it's just a joke, but we want people to show up and participate when we have high thresholds like this, where it's not tied to a quorum. We always joke that we're going to put the most controversial amendment into our package, but just have it a separate vote. So that way we know people will actually come out and vote, because we're going to take their pickup trucks out of the community that have never been a non-pickup truck community. Again, I'm being facetious and joking, but that's the only way that you can get people to come out. when you have such a high threshold. So one of the things that we always recommend is looking at your threshold and making sure that for future purposes, you reduce it to what's reasonable for your community so that you can continue to pass amendments as time changes and as we move forward in the future.
So can you fully restrict rentals?
So 2013, the Condo Act was amended to provide that if you have rentals and you want to put some restrictions on rentals, then again, that's only going to apply for the individuals who vote in favor for it. And when that individual sells, or when someone sells, it's going to apply to that new buyer, so new owner rather. So, and then that was amended in 2021, July 1st, 2021 for HOAs. So it's an effective date of July 1st for those, now effectively for both condos and HOAs. So ultimately you can't today, so long as you have rentals existing, but it's eventually as homes sell, you can make it a non-rental community, which we'll see how long that takes for any of those communities. I do still recommend that associations work to pass rental restrictions, especially certain associations which have high rentals, rental amounts, because that is something for lending and for insurance and for underwriting, even for mortgages, that all three of those particular categories look at as kind of an unfavorable condition. So you want to make sure that if you are seeing a trend of investor purchasers, et cetera, you communicate clearly, just like any other amendment, to the community why this is important and try to get that passed. At least restrictions, reasonable restrictions. One of the most favorable ones today is that 1-year moratorium or 2-year moratorium once you purchase. So that can be a deterrent to investors to purchase in your community. So it is something, again, the main point I think here for your community to understand is it does affect your ability to obtain loans. It affects your ability for underwriting of individual mortgages, and it does and sometimes can affect insurance rates.
So if I own a unit for 25 years and I had been renting it, I can continue to rent that. The only thing that that an association can do is to put stiffer restrictions on that process, correct?
If an amendment passes, then it's because a number, obviously the requisite number, voted in favor of it to pass. What is difficult to understand about the statute, it's almost a penalty for those who vote in favor of it. So obviously, if you're renting your home, you're not going to want to vote in favor of a rental cap of how many units can be rented at one time, because that will put you back into the cap. So the owners who, and that's why it's kind of a timely amendment to look at, because the sooner the better for the owners who do not want to rent their unit. You have to get enough owners, obviously, to pass that. And those would be the owners who have no interest in renting. Because again, if they vote no, then it's not applicable to them. But if you vote yes, it applies to you until you sell your unit. And those would be the rental restrictions, which relate to the ability to rent. Terms, times, if it's a 4-month rental allowance now, if I vote yes for it, my next rental may have to be 12 months, whatever the amendment was. So if that gives you a better explanation, if you vote
But
no,
the person that voted no, he doesn't have to, because I voted yes, I have to abide by the new amendment. But if somebody voted no, then they don't have to abide by anything.
they don't have to abide by any amendment that affects their leasing term or the ability to lease. But then you do have to now submit an application. Your renter has to be screened. They have to pay the $150. Those types of procedural or approval type of amendments apply no matter what. It's only the restriction on the ability to rent. Again, increasing the term of a rental from 4 months to required 6 months. I can no longer rent for 4 months if I voted yes. If that helps.
We have a lot of questions about cost. Is there flat fees? What's the cost for this size unit? Should they just contact you directly or your office directly to talk about cost? Because I would imagine that it's all going to be extremely different based on the size of the community, based on how the documents, so on and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about pricing and how that normally looks and what they should do to acquire pricing from you?
Yeah, you nailed it. It's really going to be factored into, the overall goal of the association, the number of units, how large your association is, or perhaps different factors like whether you want to amend all 3 governing documents or maybe just the bylaws to start out with and see how it goes. All those different factors will come into the flat rate that we would provide to the association. And the best way to obtain that is just to contact us. And what we do is we look at your governing documents and have a brief conversation. It's almost like going to the doctor and seeing what's wrong, what do we do to fix it, and how much it's going to cost. But it is a flat rate. And I will tell you that our flat rate retainer does provide the framework that I've discussed, where it's the introductory meeting, the first draft, the town hall, the limited proxy, and moving through that process. So it gives the board a really good description of what's included in that flat rate. For example, we have a client, but potentially going to amend their documents for your multi-condominium buildings. This is something that's interesting. That's sometimes the multi-condominium buildings in certain situations, you may be, Hollow Lakes Condo, but you have 25 buildings, and each of those 25 buildings has their own declaration. So you can, by statute, consolidate that into one declaration. That's a really big project. So that would have a different flat rate associated with it because we're consolidating all 25. So a really big, several, multiple hours put into that project just for the mechanics of consolidating 25 into one, so that then in the future, your association doesn't have 25 individual declarations for those 25 buildings. So there is a way and a purpose to do that, but that would be a much higher flat rate. It's kind of a more unusual project, but we're really just looking at the hours to provide the association. I will tell you, typically our hours exceed what our flat rate is, just because we try to do the best job we can do to get you a completed project. But the best way to approach that is to contact, and then we'll take a look and determine what the best flat rate is to achieve the outcome that we need to achieve for the association.
Don't local governments have some control over rentals?
Local governments have control over taxing of rentals and registrations of short-term rentals. So you'll want to make sure I depending on an association client, it's not the association's job to police those people, but from time to time when we have a trouble situation, you can refer back to both the DBPR, if you have short-term rentals, has licensing requirements for rentals under 30-something days. If you have Airbnb issues, sometimes people don't know that, they're not licensed. And then typically municipalities have short-term rentals, which are usually determined to be less than 6 months. So those types of things, they do exist, and they become, they come in handy when you do have like a trouble landlord renter situation where we want to look to the outside of our governing documents to see if they're complying with the state and your municipality.
We could do a webinar just on rentals.
Oh yeah, we could. They're amazing.
Paula, excuse me, can I just interrupt here? We're
Sure.
going over, we're almost at an hour and 10 minutes, and I wanted to see how much longer so we can just tell the audience your slides will go.
We went through most of these, and I think maybe just a few more minutes and we can answer some questions, because we touched upon the proxy, the limited proxy. We covered that in detail. With that, there's also the ability to do a written consent, which works similar to a limited proxy. And we talked about the number of votes. We talked about the 90 days and adjourning. I went through that particular process, which again is a very key process when you have especially a larger association to get your amendments passed. We also touched upon just the framework. How long will the amendment process take? It depends on your community, but please understand it's not a fast process. Because it's so collaborative, it goes back and forth through drafts. And of course, hopefully your attorney's, working on other projects as well. So you have to fit in the timeframes with respect to council. What I usually do is I set our timeframes and I make our dates and our calendar beforehand so that both I can do my work that's necessary, and of course the board or the committee can do its work for review, et cetera, to get the process done. And I think, again, I didn't touch upon this, I think, to the degree I'd like to, because I see this from time to time. It's absolutely necessary to obtain legal counsel to amend your governing documents. There's a statutory requirement with respect to strike through and underline certain language. And ultimately, your governing documents, even though you may have board members who practice, estates and trust in Connecticut or whatever type of law somewhere else, or even if they're a lawyer in Florida, you really do need to work with a community association lawyer, because it is becoming very nuanced area of the law. So you want to make sure that your governing documents, if you move through the process, you're using legal counsel to do so, an experienced community association lawyer. We talked about the cost. We'll have to change this slide because 75 to 10,000, depending upon the association, those have increased. I think this is a few years old at least. So I think most of our competitors are typically higher than us. That's fair to say, right, Katie? So that's, the full rewrite you want to know going in. And I think for any association attorney, my recommendation is to have a flat rate. And that flat rate should come with a very clear understanding of what's included, because you don't want to get halfway through and become frustrated with each other. Other drivers of amendments cost, we haven't touched upon that, but repeated revisions, multiple additions, wordsmithing by directors, having maybe a dissident group creating a lot of problems where the attorney has to spend additional billable hours to address those.
Those don't exist.
Those don't exist. Typically, I don't see them often in our amendment process, but I have seen a few amendment process, plans go south because of that dissident group. So you want to make sure that they're out there, and if you address them immediately, the best way that you can. And those are some of the cost drivers outside of that flat rate that could happen. Again, we're talking about fixed fees. And we'll have, again, the last part of this is once it's passed, you're going to record your governing documents. There's a recording cost associated with that. You will send those governing documents that are recorded to the association. If you're a 720, you can send a postcard or a cover letter with the ORB and page number, and also have a set if somebody wants a set to be picked up.
Paula, with that really quickly, because this came in through our email and prior, can they distribute all that electronically, or do they have to give paper?
Well, that's a great question. So the question is can you distribute all of this electronically? So one of the things that you want to put in your document restatement cart first is your consent to receive notices electronically. So if you have that consent from most of your owners, then you are saving a significant amount of time and money by sending those documents electronically, both the proxy, the vote package, et cetera, which, as you guys know, the package itself, the documents itself can expand beyond 1 inch of copy paper, copy cost. So one of the first things you want to do as a board, if you haven't yet, not only for your amendment process and your documents, but just generally, is if you do not have the written consent form back from your unit owners that allows you to send notices via email, that is something as a housekeeping measure which saves cost and money across the board. So that's a great question. And that's something that's one of our first questions that we ask when we do the amendment process is, do you have the written consent to send this electronically? Because if you don't now, let's start working on it, because it's a huge cost and time saver. And with that, that concludes, unless anyone has any other questions, just generally, because I know we are over time, and if typically we tell people,
Rudy.
Yeah, so usually what we, when we have a lot of questions left over, Vivint will send us those questions and we can try to answer some of those offline. And then when Peggy sends a recap, she's going to send out a follow-up email to all the participants. It's going to have everyone's contact information. At that time, it will have the link from Vivian of the recording. As she stated, you can't watch that later and get credit for it. You had to be on the live presentation. And if we can answer some of those questions, we can try to put those in there as well. Also, we'll never get to all the questions, and that's why we give our contact information. So if anybody has any questions, reach out to Paula or reach out to any of the other brand or subject matter experts on this call, and we can take it from there. So great feedback in the chat. It was so informative, Paula. I want to thank you for all of your knowledge and experience, and we look forward to the next presentation.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Rudy.
Thanks for having us.
Peggy, you wanna
Absolutely.
close this out?
Yes, I just want to interject that use your property management company to put together some town hall meetings for this. This is a very important project, and the more information everybody's informed, like Paula was saying, you're really going to get more people to vote for it than against it. So same thing. Thank you, Paula. Great information, great presentation. Thank you, sponsors. And I do have a few webinars coming up in March, so please look for those announcements, and please stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all for
Have a good
attending.
day, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.